Evening all on Playchess and Twitch TV. This is the Kingscrusher radio show, so I'm usually doing this at 9 o'clock UK time on Tuesday evenings. I just want to turn off this echo. Well, okay, echo stopped. So if you want to try and be there, just Twitch TV Kingscrusher, you can follow it, but also on the Playchess server. Okay, so let's have a look. Let's continue looking. Final instalments actually for the World Cup 2013, and I guess everyone knows, it's no secret by now, that Vladimir Kramnik successfully won the World Cup tournament. So I thought it would be interesting to check out how he did it. I think we've covered one or two games already in the recent shows of Kramnik's, but let's go over some of the recent games, and the key game which he had to play in his final match, Dmitry Andreykin. So let's have a look. That game, that key game, played 30th of August. Vladimir Kramnik was playing white. It was there were 4 games, and this was the only decisive game which let Kramnik win the match. So d4 from Vladimir, and Dmitry Andreykin started with e6. So he's flexible with the French defence, you know, for e4 for d5, or he's inviting obviously c4. But in an earlier round, Andreykin beat Karjakin in the French defence. He's quite a good French defence player. So I don't know. So Vladimir decided c4. After knight f6, we have knight f3. So Queen's Indian territory. This is going to be a very solid positional game. Just from the opening, you can tell it's going to be quite solid from both sides. d5, bishop g5, bishop e7, knight c3, and now black plays h6, bishop h4. So this is standard Queen's Gambit decline territory. Castles, e3, Tartakoa variation, this b6. So the bishop is often just going to b7 here. Bishop d3. Now waiting for that bishop to come here. Now playing d takes c4. So this opens up this diagonal for that bishop when it comes to b7. So black's eyeing, it seems, quite comfortably the e4 square for the moment, but white's position is quite solid as well. And if you look structurally, this c file, that could be a useful target, that c7 pawn at some point. Okay, white castles, knight bd7, queen e2, and this looks as though that maybe also it does a couple of things, maybe e4 at some point, but also even bishop a6 to just get rid of this guy might be interesting. We see a6, which actually stops bishop a6 completely, and means, you know, maybe b5 later, and knight b6 is also on the cards. Rook ft1, knight d5. So exchange of bishops, is that going to happen? Bishop g3, eyeing the sensitive c7 pawn already. And now Andreykin plays knight takes c3. Okay, b takes. And now trying to get rid of his c pawn. If white plays this, he's getting rid of that potential liability. But the c file is not a problem now. With that blockage there, a rook going to c1 is not a problem. It's all blocked anyway. So what is going on here in terms of white's plan? Well, white still can play for e4, and he does play e4 here. Okay, now black takes on g3, hg, b5, bishop d3. Now there is this eyeing of the c4 square now after knight b6. So okay, has black got enough grip on these light squares? And what about knight a4? Wouldn't it just attack this vulnerable c3 pawn? Has white got any prospects on the king side? As soon as he plays something like e5, he's giving black on the plate the d5 square. He doesn't really want to do that, and he's extending the scope of the bishop. So this requires some delicate positional maneuvering here. Okay, we see actually the move Queen E3, Knight A4. Now one of the points, Bishop C2, so protecting that C3 pawn. Now a bit of an adventure with the knight, it reroutes to C4. It's coming to C4. Okay, it's attacked, it goes to C4. Queen C1, looks a bit awkward, but White's position remains intact, and White is looking forward to A4 to at least try and damage this queenside pawn structure a little bit. Okay, now Black plays a very energetic move. C5, just trying to undermine White's central control. For the moment it's secure enough, just this knight and this pawn is enough. A4, so targeting this B5 pawn. C takes, C takes. Rook C8. So what's going on here? Is this pawn hanging? A takes, A takes. So first question here, is it too dangerous to play? It looks as though it should be too dangerous to play this. It wasn't played. In the game we saw Queen E1. So let's just ask a simple question. Rook takes B5. Or is it a simple question? So what would Black play here? I think I've spotted that maybe Knight D6 simply would attack the rook. I mean, as an example, and protect this. And this nasty pin means actually Bishop E4 next, wherever this rook moves. So I think that's why this pawn cannot be taken. So anyway, we see Queen E1, so still leaving this B pawn vulnerable. Okay, it's protected. Now Rook B4. So that C4 knight might be a subject of Bishop D3 soon. The pawn being blocked, so it's a fixed target. It's fixed that target. Rook A8. Rook D1. As though now also D5. There's interest in D5 potentially. Rook A3. And in fact D5 is played now. ED, ED. Rook E8. Okay, and now you might think, hang on, this queen, is it really being forced to move here? I mean, where can it move to? It can't move there, can't move here. But we see quite a surprising move, and I don't know how many of you are awake. So let's have a look at this position. If I give you 20 seconds starting from now, what would you play in this position? So 20 seconds starting from now, what would you play? Anyone? Any ideas? Okay, not too many ideas. So it looks as though Queen F1 might be one of the main options, because you probably ruled out D takes, see, because it's check, isn't it? Taking this queen is with check. But actually that's what Kramnik played. He plays D takes C6. So giving up his queen for bishop and a rook. But it's an advanced pawn, so we see rook takes, rook, and now knight takes. So rook and bishop against queen is not normally that brilliant, but here it's a bit of a special position. The bishop here is eyeing the black king's escape hatch, so the rook, and this is quite dangerous if a rook can crash through at the moment. This pawn is also pretty dangerous, and it's that pawn which black attacks. Now we see rook takes b5. So, okay, what's going on here? Well, this pawn is immune at the moment because of any rook check would be mating. So black deals with that first. So now he really has given himself a hatch, escape hatch. So queen takes c6 is now threatened. Okay, is there enough for white here with that advanced pawn on c6. Well, rook c5 protects it and attacks the knight. And the game continues. Knight e5, bishop e4, holding on to the pawn again. Knight g4, knight d3. Now white's got this plan of maybe knight b4 to d5 to attack the queen, to unblockade and liberate the pawn. King g7. This has to be done quite carefully though. Maybe knight b4, there's tricky things that black can do here. Like, for example, you know, maybe even knight takes f2 because we're on this g3. This is quite dangerous, potentially. I haven't actually engine checked this, but this is a plan in principle. But how do we achieve that? I mean, we can also go this way, potentially. We see for the moment bishop f3, just asking the knight to go away, to stop eyeing f2. The knight goes back, and now knight b4. So much safer. See that little delicate move? How many of us would have, in this position, left this dangerous knight here eyeing f2 and played a routine move? So that bishop f3 is a key move here. It seems getting that knight back. Actually, I've heard a few weeks ago, there's a bit of advice, I think, on somewhere about if there's knights on the 5th rank against you, you should ask them to go back. It does eye soft spots. The knight was eyeing this soft spot. Just to emphasize the danger of that, just briefly again, knight takes. I mean, I'm not entirely sure this variation, what would happen here, but queen e3 check actually wins the rook. That doesn't look too good. So yeah, a little bit of danger with knights there. So bishop f3 kicking the knight back, and now going into action with knight b4. So it looks as though knight d5, just if these knights can be exchanged, it's going to end up being just, okay, the exchange down, but 2 rooks against the queen. Exchange down. So h5. Now rook dc1. Rook a7. And now these 2 knights are getting exchanged. The queen cannot afford to move back. You know, c7's too powerful. So knight takes, bishop takes. So we're at move 40 now. And okay, it's well worth the exchange, it seems. The bishop and pawn, is it worth the rook? I'd say this is a very dangerous pawn. So how does this happen now? Queen d8. Okay, releasing the blockade to reach a simplification, which black may have thought is drawable. So he's provoking c7. Now if he didn't do this, if the queen had just stayed there, let's turn off the iPhone. If the queen had just stayed there, okay, what would be white's plan? Well, potentially, I think white's plan could be something like this, potentially, and taking care of taking it, then we can just queen. Some sort of plan like that prepared, maybe with king h2 first. So getting a pawn to b7 would be the next stage. So this simplifies the position, provoking c7 immediately for this little tactic. Rook takes c7 to win the d5 bishop. But the 2 rooks versus the queen, in theory the 2 rooks are better than the queen, and you can immediately see perhaps that if the rooks double and we pick up f7, well, that could still be tricky because we've got double pawns. Even if we won a pawn, so what? Would that really matter? So what happens here? We see rook e1 and the rooks do double. But maybe black believed this was winning for white, this endgame, because actually black played f6 here. If we just quickly look at king g7, let's just check this out. If this had occurred, one thing that white could potentially do is even potentially dynamically give up a pawn, maybe, just to liberate the king. Like this could be dangerous in this kind of ending, to try and get something, but no, that doesn't seem at all dangerous actually, so forget that. Alright, let's just bring the king in as another idea actually, or f4, maybe even just f4 and then bring the king in might be the idea to try and get a zugzwang. So if we go with f4, okay, I'm just thinking this is going to be slowly winnable like this. So black, he didn't want to go for that. He just plays f6. And we see rook e7, queen a5. Okay. And there's a kind of dangerous looking mating net being woven immediately now after f4, threatening rook h7 mate. So black gives himself an escape route with g5 for the king to come out like this. King h2, king g6. But now f takes g5. And this is really quite dangerous with these two rooks. Black plays king takes g5, rook h7. What's the threat? Well, if white can win this pawn with like check and try and take this pawn next. So f5, which means that at least king f6 will be holding on to the rook if rook g7. That happens. Check, king f6. The rook goes to attack the queen though, and now we're still, we're attacking the queen, we're attacking this. We're threatening also rook h6 is quite dangerous sometimes. Queen b4. But now check here actually. And this is really bad. If king here, just mating. Ouch. So king e5. Rook takes h5. White's made some progress here. Big progress. Queen b1. Check, and now the other pawn drops. Whoops. It's getting worse. Rook b5. Check. Rook bb6. Check. Rook h7. Rook gg7. And here after rook e7, black resigned here on move 63. So a bit of a grind game there, but this was the key game which won Kramnik the tournament. The other 3 games were drawn. So okay, in this position, it is looking winning for white, but there might be still a little bit of work here to do. Okay, so black had enough here anyway. So it was a very solid positional performance, this game. Let's look at some earlier games of Kramnik to get to that stage. One of the most dramatic short and sharp games was actually against Vladimir Kramnik, the French GM Gavriel. Let's have a quick look at that, which is more my cup of tea actually, because I tend to enjoy more recently the sharper, sweeter games, but it's good to go over long positional games, obviously, and even draws. It's good for one's chess. But this is a very interesting game. So Vladimir Kramnik playing white. So Kramnik black. Let's flip the board actually. So e4, and Kramnik relies on e5, knight f3, knight c6, and maybe he didn't want Kramnik to go into a Russian system, which Kramnik's an expert in. So bishop b5, knight f6, that sort of thing. So he plays the Scotch game d4. But does this give white an advantage? Let's see. E takes d4, knight takes, and in this position, actually, a very popular move is, I believe, bishop c5. But there's an interesting option here, bishop b4, being demonstrated. Bishop b4 check. So, he doesn't play knight c3, he plays c3, and now bishop c5. And you might think it's a little bit strange to do this, to spend an extra move for the check. But the pawn on c3 is inhibiting knight c3, so in a way it's an interesting improvement over an immediate bishop c5, one worth bearing in mind. Bishop e3, bishop drops back, bishop d3, and knight f6, now both sides castle, knight takes c6, b takes c6, e5, knight d5, And I don't know how you would assess this position. If I asked you at move 10, who stands better, white or black, I wonder who you would say here. If I gave you 20 seconds on this position, who would you rather play here, white or black? Any thoughts? Well, that c3 is actually quite a major significance, I think, here. This knight does seem a little bit passive. How is it going to get out in the game? And the immediate threat of knight takes e3 needs to be addressed. White really doesn't want to play this, and a takes. Black's got pressure on the a file. This horrible knight on d5 can go to f4 later, maybe. So it doesn't look that attractive here. White is actually faced with some concrete issues, and he just humbly retreats the bishop back. Now we see d6. Okay, and this horrible knight is kicked with c4 back to e7. And white now actually creates a threat, queen c2. So attacking that pawn, that's parried with knight g6. And okay, this pawn is a bit of a vulnerability, and it exchanges here, which means black's undoubling his pawns. C takes d6, but at least now knight c3, the knight is seeing a nice square, but there isn't a knight here. And as I've often said in videos on YouTube, if there's no knight here, what does this mean for king safety? It means that the soft spot h2, I know this is really super crude logic, but it's weaker. h2 is actually fundamentally weaker. The king side generally here is weaker, and we see actually a very direct move here, queen h4, which is really justified by the position. And it's interesting that what the queen is also doing is protecting h7. So this battery seems a bit pointless in some respects, because actually after potentially knight e5, there are very nasty threats coming in, like knight g4. We've also got this pressure on f2. So how to evict this queen on h4? It's a real pain in this position. So black has somehow whipped up, I would say, you know, an advantage here with black. We see rook ae1, knight e5. As I say, this battery doesn't mean anything. The queen's protecting h7. There's a threat now of knight g4, just threatening horrible things like that. So what does white do here? Well, we see rook e4. Okay. The queen steps back to h5. I guess if knight g4 here, that can be parried with h3, just making use of that pin. So the queen stepped back. I mean, that's just, maybe there's even stronger. But okay, the queen steps back. Bishop e2, the queen is attacked again, but it's driving the queen back to g6 now. Okay, and there's an immediate threat now of bishop f5 with a nice skewer. So the queen drops back here out of that skewer range. But now we see bishop h3 threatening mate in 1. It's all become quite direct, this position, rather strangely. And it's difficult to see what white does here against this direct threat of mating on g2. What does white do here? He tries bishop f3. I mean, he doesn't want to lose the exchange or anything with g3. So bishop f3. But now bishop f5. And this is really quite nasty business here. This knight's a really good piece. Always threatening knight takes f3. The queen's got to protect f3. And bearing that in mind, after rook h4, which looks like a very artificial move, but what else? where else can the rook move? If the rook moved back here, we would just take on f3. If the rook moves here, it seems bishop c2, and if the queen moves here, then knight takes f3. If the queen moves to e2, then we've got bishop d3. Forget that. I mean, this is embarrassing. This forcing move, bishop c2, is highly embarrassing here. So you know, white tried. I'm not sure about rook f4, but white tries rook h4, and this move is still embarrassing. Bishop c2, it's winning the exchange. You know, if queen e2, then we've got bishop d3, surely. So if the queen moves, knight takes f3. So white tries actually queen takes c2. Okay, which looks very interesting, but a bit desperate. I think the idea, well, the hopeful idea was queen takes c2, which wasn't played, because then we'd have bishop e4 and attacking h7. So we'd have like a perpetual, or not. No, it's actually even queen h6. It's not even a perpetual. Forget that. Let's rewind there. What does white actually have in this position? Does white have anything here? This doesn't even work, does it? I don't think this even works. But even easier though, in this position, after queen takes c2, Kramnik just plays knight takes f3 check, and there's absolutely nothing. White has to just resign. So that was a bit of a strange disaster game from white. And I guess we can learn something from this actually for the Scotch opening, that this seemingly innocuous move bishop b4 check seems to be quite dangerous. In fact, after c3 is provoked, how did this collapse for white so quickly? If we have a look at this game again, this knight, which was the defensive knight, is coming to exchange and double the pawns. Now this pawn though played a role later to undouble these pawns, and this knight's coming back quite strongly to e5 in the game. But this queen coming here, it looks like a rather simple, straightforward moves from black, all rather quite elegant and dangerous. So even though the queen's like kicked around a bit, it's still finding an ideal square on g6 with this nasty bishop f5 and knight f3 stuff going on. So I think this is one of the big disaster games of the tournament actually, this game. Does anyone have an idea about this queen takes c2 before we leave this game? What was white's idea here if queen takes c2? This doesn't work, does it? Does anyone think this works? This does anything for white? Let's just check this again. Bishop e4, take here, check. Because we've always got queen h6. I don't even see this works. I should have really engine checked this. It doesn't even seem to work. Okay. So there's a question here. What happens on bishop h5 after bishop c2? Okay, bishop h5. That's a good question. Intriguing. You know, I think no. I thought there might be a problem with f2 here. Intriguing. I think he should have tried that. It looks better than the game continuation, that's for sure. Queen d3 looks quite good though. possibly. But white's still in the game. Has anyone got any better than queen d3 here? Oh, thank you. Ironmas, yes. So you're saying Ironmas on play chess. Well done. Bishop takes d1. And then if bishop takes, we just play knight takes g6, and we're attacking that poor h4 rook. That doesn't work then. Black's just gobbled material. Well done, Ironmas. Give yourself 50 points. Well done. So, yeah. So that's no good. Does that answer the question on bishop h5 anyway? Was there any other question? Sorry, okay. Bishop, yeah. Was there any other question about this game? It was quite a crushing game, wasn't it? I don't think c3 was a mistake. I think it's just theory, isn't it? Some sort of theory c3 in the opening. Okay, so let's have a look at another game, shall we? From one of Kramnik's earlier rounds. There's a positional strangulation which might be instructive, in inverted commas. Against, but in the first round, Kramnik's opponent had a much lower FIDE rating. Let's have a look at that, because he also played the Dutch defence. So g3, knight f6. So Kramnik against Gillen Bualia. We see a kind of Dutch stonewall with b3 here, which intends a dark square grip quite quickly. d6, d4, d5. Okay, so knight bd2, c6. I think I've seen Kasparov mention in this structure against the Dutch stonewall, it's nice to have a knight here and a knight here, just eyeing, the two key central squares. We see knight e5, so that knight can come here and this one can come here as a plan. So that one goes there. Okay. But actually, with the knight on e4 here, white doesn't play this. White actually plays f3, doesn't mind exchanging off this guy, just leaving this pretty knight eyeing these two key squares. Okay, knight f6. Now c4. Queen e8. a4. As though bishop a3, we just want to exchange off this guy to weaken the dark squares everywhere. Because this knight's sitting quite nicely centralized at the moment. Bishop d7. For the moment though, not bishop a3 here, but a5. And this could be useful for marking out some squares and trying to restrain black on the queen side. And again, not playing bishop a3, keeping that in reserve, rook e1. Queen h5 looks aggressive, but what does it actually do? The queen needs some support here. There's no real attack at the moment. Knight e5. a6. Okay, this does mean b6 is highlighted. This general freeze of the pawns. And now finally this strategic exchange, just gagging for it really. Bishop a3. Just get rid of this defender on the dark squares. And we have a nice lock down on the queen side. And so why do this? Well, it means there's less play. If the opponent's pawn structure is more fixed, there's generally less counterplay as a general rule here. And another general rule, if you do exchange off and you've got a mighty knight on e5, this is difficult to get rid of now. There's nothing to challenge it. Bishop c8. So yeah, black's getting positionally done over. So b4 now. And it looks as though if white's left alone, then maybe just b5 and start to try and inflict even more structural damage, weaken these two pawns. So black decides a lesser evil here is d takes c4. So we're left with this potentially vulnerable e6 pawn if the position opens up. Knight takes c4, queen e8, rook d3. Now e4. Takes, bishop d7. d5, it starts to look quite painful now if white can get a pawn on d6, which he does now. So this looks quite painful after knight e5. There's no attack to speak of for black here, it seems. He's grovelling a bit. Bishop h3 now, king h8, he's just waiting. Queen e3. What is black up to? Rook ed1. Now queen b8. And now we see rook f1, and black maybe is not happy here. I mean, look at this restraint on the dark squares. Black hasn't got counterplay on the queen side. This bishop's really bad. This pawn's vulnerable. There's a constant threat actually of something like knight takes if white wants to. Bishop e6 looks quite tempting potentially if it wasn't for d6. But rook f1 actually betrays an idea, I believe, of a very simple idea. Forget about the e6 pawn. I think there's another very, very simple idea here which might be effective. Is just g4 for g5, just to get knight f7 check in, because it's eyeing, you know, potentially for the f7 square. I can't really see much of a defense if that is a potential threat. You know, if h6 we just play knight g6, winning the exchange. What does black actually do here? It seems an incredibly hard position, this position. If you've got any ideas for what black can do here, have a look. But he actually resigned actually after rook f1. So this was in the first round. Black actually resigned. But does anyone have any ideas how even g4, g5 is parried? I mean, there might be some other threats as well. But black does seem devoid of counterplay. If I gave you 20 seconds, just have a look here. Does anyone see any ideas? It looks as dead as a dodo, actually. As the expression goes, you know, the dodos, they became extinct because they couldn't fly. It's a common popular expression, as dead as a dodo, but it's I don't know, it's relevant for this position. It doesn't look as though black's got any defense for g4, g5. Also, yeah, I think that's all I can say about this. Unless you've got any questions, let's go on to another one. So this poor guy had to play Kramnik again. So with the white pieces, did he fare any better? Let's have a quick look at the game with the white pieces. I think c5 we just take it. There's no problem there. So with the white pieces against Kramnik, d4, knight f6, c4, e6, Queen's Indian territory, b6. So Kramnik playing black. Actually, let's flip the board. So let's take black's perspective. So Kramnik playing black, played b6 here. a3, bishop b7, knight c3, d5, bishop g5, bishop e7. And now white voluntarily gave up his dark square bishop with bishop takes f6. So c takes d. He's trying to lock down this bishop at least behind a pawn. e3. So white's trying to play quite solidly here. c5, castles, rook e8, rook c1. Okay, well now we see an interesting move, maybe. Knight a6. So the knight can do this kind of thing later, maybe. So queen c2, attacking h7, g6, rook fd1. Okay, so white's trying to play solidly, and he's encouraging Kramnik to dare to play c4, because ordinarily that would release the tension. Would we consider that a bad move? Because sometimes you might think if you release the tension with c4, you're just asking later for white to react with e4 at the right time. But you know, it really does depend on the finesse of the position, and actually Kramnik judged c4 to be quite effective here, because he's got enough grip in this particular position, it seems, on the e4 square. Bishop goes back. Now knight c7. Okay, rook e1, b5. So the question is e4 at all dangerous? I wouldn't have thought so, particularly because It wasn't played, but if it was played, you know, d takes, knight takes. It doesn't attack the bishop, and maybe knight c5, you'd think. I think bishop g7, and that looks comfortable for black. So white didn't really think that was that good to play e4. He played actually g3. Now a5, threatening, it seems to swamp white and at least get rid of the central control. The knight's controlling e4. If b4 just dislodged this knight, would be exerting more influence on e4 here, surely. And that's what happens. Bishop g2, b4. So white's been squeezed a bit. And even worse now, knight b5. The knight's actually putting a lot of pressure and strain with potential c3s now on a3. So knight d2, queen b6, a4, and this pawn actually might be a target on a4 at some point. h4, rook ad8. Okay, so it looks as though, again, white doesn't seem to have too much counterplay here. It doesn't look that promising to play e4 here. It just tends to weaken d4 in this position. So tries h5, knight e6. Well, what can you do if you're playing Kramnik? I think he's just Kramnik's just too strong for most players. The best of times, bishop c8. So the bishop is being redeployed potentially to this diagonal if the knight, say, moves here, bishop f5. So hg, hg, queen d2, bishop g7, queen d6, knight c7. Again, white's just waiting around here without too much counterplay. And now improving the knight via a8, knight ace a8. The knight can come and try and attack the a4 pawn. We can gang up on the a4 pawn potentially. So knight b6, bishop b3, trying to do something to break up black's pawns or provoke c3. But Kramnik didn't have that. He just plays bishop f5 here. So queen b2. Again, this is like provocation for c3. But Kramnik keeps the tension. Rook c8. It's nice to have this c takes option as well. Okay, and again, forget c3. Just plays g5. Knight h5. Now queen g6. And actually here, white's king is all of a sudden vulnerable in this position, because if you look at this, the queen, there's kind of these pieces stuck over here, and we've got this h file ready to go now after knight takes g7, king takes, because this rook can come in on the h file. So white's kind of tied down by these pawns over here. B takes, d takes. He tries d5 check, c3 finally, queen b3, bishop e4. This pawn is really weak as well. Bishop takes, queen takes. The pawn, I mean, white's just totally without counterplay here, it seems. He tries d6, and now just rook h8. Doesn't matter about d7. Black's threatening rook takes h2 here, to which there doesn't seem to be any reasonable defense. For example, he resigned here. If d7, you know, rook takes h2 does seem to be mating. We can't do anything here because of queen g2 mate, and this is mating, so that's not very nice. So again, white seems to be run out of counterplay in this game with the white pieces this time. If we go back, so this seems to be a dangerous opening as well for black to play this queen's engine. So how exactly did this happen again? How did white just run out of counterplay? It's interesting that e4 doesn't seem to be on the cards at any point. I mean, unless anyone really thinks wants to argue the case here that, see, the natural reaction to releasing tension would surely be for e4 in the future. But you know, if we tried e4, unless anyone wants to try this again to make e4 work here, I just don't see it in this position. As an example, just bishop g7, because we've also got this kind of bishop eyeing f3, which is really unpleasant in this position. You know, bishop f3, yeah, and it just looks horrible. So I don't really think this e4, unless anyone wants to mention that if white hasn't got e4, now this is the problem. If white hasn't got e4, then there's this kind of avalanche on the queen side to face. So I don't know. He just ran out of counterplay. It's interesting. He was just squeezed on the queen side, and then actually this whole operation here just accelerated the king's weaknesses later. It just all couldn't be used by black. This H file soon. So this was a key move coming up. This G5. Where was that knight moving? I mean, even if the knight had gone back, then maybe, you know, black could just arrange. Well, even c3 looks absolutely disgusting for white here. Actually, where is this queen going here? If the queen, you know, hasn't got over there, it looks, you don't want this sort of position, because then, you know, we can just arrange this kind of attack as well, or we can do anything here really. So yeah, it looked pretty horrible, this position here. What has Kramnik really done here? He's tied down white on the queen side and attacked on the king side. Kind of Nimzovich game, because sometimes Aaron Nimzovich would do that. Make sure the opponent's like tied up and then go for the attack on the king side. So you kind of removing yourself from the possibility of defeat before going on to the attack. It's not a war principle, but we see that here in this positional game, that black was never in any real danger, and he got an attack here. Okay, so let's have a look at another game. Now this was a really big challenge for Kramnik against Ivanchuk, and let's have a quick look at this game to get some idea of it. Very, very complex, of course. So d4, Vasily Ivanchuk was playing white. Let's take the black perspective again, and after c4, e6, knight f3, we saw actually d5, knight c3, bishop e7, and Ivanchuk plays bishop f4. Yawn, isn't it? Boring. No. Back to Morphy games next week. No, just kidding. So black castles here. E3. So Kramnik plays knight bd7. And now c5. Not making a square for the bishop. You might think the bishop should be a square made for the bishop, but no, he doesn't mind the bishop being in trouble a bit after knight h5. Bishop d3, and black snaps off the bishop. b6, and it seems logical to try and undermine these this pawn chain here. b4, a5, a3. So who's better here? This looks like a dynamic sort of pawn structure. White's accepted double pawns, but he's got this kind of bind on e5. He's got this space advantage here on the queen side. Who would you say is better here if I gave you 20 seconds to choose? What would you think about this position? Anyone? It's just a position, isn't it? But both sides have got things to work on here. Often, black wants to exchange off this bishop, I think, for this one, if he gets a chance. Okay, so c6, let's carry on. Queen c7, g3. Now bishop a6. And he's trying to get rid of this bishop. Because white will be weak on the light squares, potentially, if this bishop can be removed. Now if b5, this is interesting. If b5, I think that might be too loose here. Well, I think we just take, and then we've got this to work on. We've got a loose piece here as well. So, okay, so we see bishop takes a6, rook takes. Sort of the stuff, sort of Iranian would sometimes do in the Queen's engine here. So he's exchanged off that light squared bishop, and it looks, now there's a concrete threat of taking. So b5 now, c takes, knight takes, attacking the... Oh! Whoa! Hold on. Pardon me. Pardon me. There's an invisible threat here. So after b5, the idea now is quite clever. There's a loose piece on e7, which is exposed tactically by b5. So it's undermining d5. So c takes. Now not knight takes b5. I don't think this does anything for white. Queen would just perhaps just move even just here to c6. Okay, so that doesn't seem to be a problem, but what might be a problem is what was played. Knight takes d5, trying to win e7. Okay, so e takes, queen takes. So what's happening here? Rook c8, rook a1, exchanging off b takes, rook takes, rook e6, queen goes to g5, and it's kicked again, offering the d5 pawn this time. Queen takes d5, rook d6, and there's a loose piece actually here and here. Okay, we see actually after queen a2, queen c6 attacking f3 and b5. That's protected with queen e2, protecting both. Now c takes d4, getting back the pawn. So the smoke's cleared a bit. We're still equal on pawns. This pawn looks a little bit dangerous. Pass pawn here. Rook fb1. a4. The pawn, it looks as though white wants to blockade. Knight e1. Knight c5, challenging blockade in advance. Knight d3, that's taken off. Queen c3, okay. Blockade is maintained. Rook e6. Is there a concrete threat? There looks to be a concrete threat here. Now, well, at least check looks pretty dangerous, and then check here. So we see rook e5 parrying that, but giving white a slightly weak pawn on e5. So rook takes e5, f takes. I would say black's doing very nicely here, but it could slip into a draw with some inaccuracy. He tries to keep the pressure on with queen b3. So the idea, he doesn't mind trading off this for this, and this is what happens. It's far too dangerous to take this queen. This pawn's just too dangerous here, which I hope you can all see. Let's just show you. This pawn's just winning because of the check, and would be queening. So no, we want to just exchange. Queen takes d4 was played. Queen takes a3. But I think Immature might be getting in a bit of time trouble soon. King g2, queen b3. Black has got this dangerous passed pawn, but queen d7, rook a8. Can it be stopped? Rook d3. Trying to stop it from a3 looks sensible. Queen b7. Attacking the rook. Queen c8. And now, do you know, maybe Ivanchuk could have just taken the queen here. I'm not entirely sure that that's definitely losing or not. He plays actually queen f3, so he's keeping the blockade on the a3 square. Rook a5, rook a3, pronouncing blockade. Queen e8, queen e4. So if rook takes, then queen takes. You know, rook takes, we've got queen takes, and looks dead equal. But something strange happened here in this position. It looks as though it should be a draw, really, but something very, very strange after g6. Okay. Now, say you had this position with white. What would you be tempted to do here, I wonder? If I gave you 20 seconds here, what would you be tempted to do in this position with white? And what would you consider to be a major blunder? Or maybe that second question is more important. What would be a major blunder here for white? Anyone? Well, at this level, I mean, you know, at this level. Is anyone tempted for this next move? Well, I believe this is a major blunder. f4, because the king's safety fundamentally is affected with f4. It really is. Maybe, you know, white could have just hanged around with this kind of balancing tactic on a4 with maybe the move, you know, king g1. Or maybe h3, possibly. Just to give the king h2. Just hang around with king h2 to g2. But f4 seems much more radical, because that second row could be a major problem for king safety now. We see h5, h4, king g7. Which improves the position slightly for the king. And Kramnik's up to something now. What is he up to? Queen b4. Check. King f2. And now horrible, horrible second row is emphasized. He can try and give up this pawn. He plays rook b5. He just wants his rook on this second row. Horrible. Queen d4 is played, at least stopping, you know, the queen stops rook b2, but check, and we're getting to that second row. It's horrible. Rook b2, and white is in big trouble now. This check is actually quite, I think, harmless here. In fact, Ivanchuk thought this position was so bad he resigned here. Let's have a look. If he plays the check, maybe just f6. White's running out of checks, and he's threatened actually with queen e2, mate. It just looks horrendous. How does white defend here? It's gone, isn't it? King safety's gone. It all started from that move f4. It doesn't look to be any way of defending the white king here. There's a question. King h3 wasn't an option. Wasn't an option? Let's have a look earlier. I think f4 just loses the game actually in this position. It's actually a losing blunder, f4. Otherwise the position was seemingly okay. King h3. So when this question about king h3. When? Oh, here, king h3. There's an amusing queen h1. That's checkmate. Okay, was there any other thing about this? Okay, so what can we say? You know, Kramnik. It's very, very difficult to get an advantage against him with the white pieces. He plays these really dull openings with black and sometimes gets a massive advantage from them, even worse. What can we say? This is how he beat Kasparov. I saw that match when he beat Kasparov in the Brain Games, and he's just the same. He's like Kramnik. He usually the same strategy. He just doesn't lose and he wins, and he just wins the whole tournament. Very impressive. Okay. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it this week. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.